Hello YouTube divers, this is Water Dive 122 and I want to welcome you all to another episode of Magic Metal Mondays. Today we are going to be finally re-ranking my top 10 favorite metal records. So basically why I say we are finally going to do this is because this was a video that I have wanted to do for a very long time, since the time I first shot my original top 10 metal albums video, which, in my full honest opinion, looking back on it, it was just absolutely cringeworthy, and I felt like I did not give a proper review for the albums, and all that crap like that. So today we are going to be finally talking about my 10 favorite metal records, but in a little bit more detail, and I will have some honorable mentions before we get to the number one spot. So let's reiterate some ground rules here. First off, I'm only looking at metal records, so as much as I love the following albums, like Hemispheres by Rush, Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes, Out of Time by REM, etc., etc., they're not going to be on this list because they're not metal records. I'm only talking about metal albums, so albums from bands like Halloween or Sabotage or Metallica. So with that said, we're gonna go ahead and jump right into the video, and like I said, I will make some honorable mentions before we get to the number one spot, but I'm pretty sure you all know what my favorite metal album is. So let's jump right into the video. So coming in at number 10 is Pyromania by Def Leppard, released in 1983. One thing I forgot to mention is that my opinions on these albums have changed drastically from the original list. Like, there's some new albums in here, some of the albums that managed to stay here from the original list might have been moved up or down. Either way. But Pyromania was one of those albums that was on the original list, and it still is here, but it drops a spot lower. That is mainly because it's just simply for the fact that there's better albums than this, in my opinion. And that's really saying a lot, because Pyromania is a classic freaking metal album. Now, I'm pretty sure you all are thinking, it's Def Leppard. Def Leppard's not a metal band. What are you talking about? And my answer to that is, for one thing, Pyromania is widely considered to be a metal record, so that's why I'm including it here. And second, early Def Leppard was new wave of British heavy metal, which, by definition, is a subgenre of metal. So there you go. Pyromania is, for what it is, it's freaking amazing. I mean, you got the three big radio hits off of this album, which are Photograph, which is my favorite Def Leppard song, Foolin' and Rock of Ages, but then you also have some kick butt tracks like Rock Rock Till You Drop, Stage Fright, and the closing track, Billy's Got a Gun, which is a very satisfying closure, in my opinion. It's just so early 80s hard rock. And I really feel like that this was the main approach that this album was going for, even though I don't really think that the band thought that this album was going to be as successful as it turned out to be. This album, if High and Dry did not put them on the map, this album definitely did. And it would remain that way for a good while. And, well, if you know Def Leppard, you know. So I'm not going to yammer on here any longer. Pyromania by Def Leppard, it's a great album. It has to be in here in my top 10. Now, moving on to number 9, we've got a little bit of a new album here. The only debut album that made it on this list, shockingly enough, it's not a debut album. It's not from Black Sabbath or Ozzy Osbourne, or from Dio, or from Guns N' Roses, or from Van Halen. Well, I think the latter two could be classified as like hard rock or something, but whatever. I'm talking about Angels Cry by Angra, released in 1993. As of right now, this is my favorite metal debut album, but Holy Diver by Dio is like very, very close. We'll get to that later. Probably in the honorable mentions, but who knows. So basically, Angels Cry by Angra is not really an album where like a metalhead will look at it and was like, "Oh my goodness, that's one of the most iconic albums of all time." It's not like that. This is a personal favorite of mine. Honestly, this album made me love power metal even more than I already did. I mean, everything from the kick butt song "Carry On" to the amazing intro that is the unknown Allegro or something like that. Unfinished Allegro, I'm sorry. From the title track, Angels Cry, to the Kate Bush cover of Wuthering Heights. There's so much stuff that's going on with this album. And, I mean, everything. Everything about this album is just so good. I mean, the vocals by Andre Matos. Andre Matos, yeah. And that's something that I want to retcon from my Angels Cry album review. I said on that video that the lead singer on this album was Fabio Leone, which was one of Angra's singers. He was their second singer. Andre Matos sang on their first couple of albums before he left the band, and I want to say the late 90s, early 2000s, before Fabio Leone joined the band, or Fabio, or who knows. But overall, Angels Cry, what a great debut album. One of my all-time favorite debut albums. I might make a separate video on that, who knows. But Angels Cry by Angra has to come in here at number 9. So, let's move on. Number 8 is Sabbath Bloody Sabbath by Black Sabbath, released in 1973. Don't worry, I'm not going to I'm not going to do a top 10 metal albums list without mentioning Black Sabbath. I mean, heck, you have to have at least one Black Sabbath album on your top 10 metal albums list. And for me, it's Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, simply because I love the tone, I love the atmosphere, I love the production on this album, I love Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the song, and Sabracadabra, so many other great songs on here. Tony Iommi's solos are just off the freaking charts. Same thing can be said about Ozzy Osbourne's vocals and Bill Ward's drums and Geezer Butler's bass. In my opinion, this was a major high point in Black Sabbath's career, and in my opinion, it was their peak. It was their peak of the '70s catalog, and really one of their biggest peaks in their whole career. Now, of course, there's a lot of amazing. We all know a lot of amazing things about Black Sabbath, from the '70s era with Ozzy Osbourne to the early '80s era with Ronnie James Dio, to the Born Again shenanigans with Ian Gillan, to the Seventh Star shenanigans with Glenn Hughes, to the late '80s, early '90s, except for Dehumanizer era of Tony Martin, Dehumanizer with Ronnie James Dio, and of course, 13, the final album, back with Ozzy back behind the mic. And that's honestly what makes Black Sabbath such a freaking amazing band, aside from the fact that they created metal. They just have a freaking mixed up as I'll get out history. It is just so entertaining to learn about these guys. It's amazing. Anyway, so Sabbath Bloody Sabbath comes in here at number 8. Freaking amazing album. Now, we're moving on to number 7, and this album was shockingly left off of my original metal albums list. I don't know why, but it was. So, the album in question is Darkness Descends by Dark Angel, released in 1986. I've talked about this album pretty much to death on this channel. I've done an album review for it. I mentioned it on my top 5 albums from 1986 video, my Dark Angel rankings, etc., etc. So I don't really need to go into too much detail of why I love this album so much and why I think it's an underrated thrash-tastic classic. But I will just summarize this up from the amazing performances from Don Dottie, Jim Durkin, Eric Meyer, Mike Gonzalez, and Gene Hoglan, to the freaking amazing songs of the title track, Burning of Sodom, Hunger of the Undead, Merciless Death, and Perish in Flames, to the amazing production, to the very, very technical and thrash-tastic atmosphere, to the absolutely punishing, to the absolute overall punishing and pummeling experience that this album gives you. It's so freaking fun. And to this day, I still can't believe that I left this off of my original list, because this album is just phenomenal in every way, shape, and form. Okay, and now we're moving on to number 6, another album that I left off of my original list simply because I didn't know this band at the time, and that is Hall of the Mountain King by Sabotage, released in 1987. I've already, like with Darkness Descends, I've already talked to death about this album. Everything from the amazing performances by the Oliva brothers, Johnny Lee Middleton and Steve Wacholtz, to the amazing songwriting, to the amazing songs in general of 24 Hours Ago, Legion, Strange Wings, the title track, White Witch, Price You Pay, and Devastation. Literally the whole album is just such a fun experience. This has always been my favorite Sabotage album, and it will very much remain that way for the longest freaking time possible. Okay, and now we're moving on to number 5. Not too many shakeups here in the top 5, but there is one. Number 5 is not one of them. It is Spreading the Disease by Anthrax, which was also number 5 on my original list. Again, this album doesn't really need that much of an explanation as to why I absolutely adore this album. Everything from Joey Belladonna's top-notch vocals to the amazing songs of AIR, Madhouse, Lone Justice, Armed and Dangerous, and Medusa, to the production, to Charlie Benate's kick-butt drumming, to the amazing guitar duo of Dan Spitz and Scott Ian, and of course, the new addition of Frank Bello on the bass. There's really not much else I can say about Spreading the Disease. It is just really a great album, and in my opinion, it's Anthrax's best, even though Among the Living is very, very close. Okay, now we're moving on to number 4. This is the only shakeup that's here within the top 5, and that is Rust in Peace by Megadeth. I had this previously ranked at number 3 on my original list, and the reason why it's moved down for me is that because I feel as though Rain and Blood by Slayer, which, spoiler alert, is the next pick, slightly edges it. But still, I get a kick out of Holy Wars, Hangar 18, and Tornado of Souls, and I really enjoy Five Magics, Take No Prisoners, the Rust in Peace Polaris, and Lucretia quite a bit. This album, in retrospect, is just freaking flawless. It's a classic for a reason. It's a masterpiece. Now moving on to number 3 is Rain and Blood by Slayer. Yet another album that I've talked to absolute death about, or something like that. However you reiterate that. So, don't need to... I really feel like that Rain and Blood is an album that doesn't really need that much explaining, because I've already talked about it in countless other videos on this channel. But I will say that it's a classic for a reason. I mean, Angel of Death, Raining Blood, 2 of the most iconic metal songs ever. But they're not the only highlights on this album. You also have Necrophobic, Jesus Saves, Criminally Insane, Altar of Sacrifice, and Postmortem, just to name a few. Really, this album, like with Rust in Peace, like with most of these albums on this list, it's freaking flawless. It is a thrash-tastic masterpiece. And now moving on to number 2, and I've got it here on the shirt, Master of Puppets by Metallica, released in 1986. Again, it's one of those albums. It is basically what it is that it is Metallica being Metallica, but they did it way better compared to their first 2 albums. Kill 'Em All is a great album, don't get me wrong. I'm just not a fan of James's vocals on that record. And Ride the Lightning is a killer album. I love Ride the Lightning, but when it comes to those 2, it nowhere near matches the power and absolute thrill that Master of Puppets has. I mean, from Battery to Master of Puppets to Welcome Home Sanitarium, to Disposable Heroes, to the instrumental Orion, to frickin' Damage Incorporated. This album just does not slow down. And like with Darkness Descends, it is a very punishing and pummeling experience. But oh my god, is it ever so fun. If you haven't heard this album, you're clearly missing out. Go listen to it right freaking now. But I'm pretty sure all of you who are watching already have. What an album this is. All right, now we're gonna get to some honorable mentions. I'm gonna go through these quick because we still got one more album to talk about. So amongst honorable mentions, I have Whose Advantage by Zentrix, Under the Sign of the Black Mark by Bathory, freaking Altars of Madness by Morbid Angel, Violence Unimagined by Cannibal Corpse. Yes, I know that was released last year, but I absolutely adore that album. My favorite death metal album so far. Freaking Beneath the Remains by Sepultura. Great stuff there. And I've even decided to bend the rules a little bit. I decided to throw in some hard rock albums a little bit. You have Under Lock and Key by Dawkins and Out of the Cellar by Rat. And then getting back to the metal, you also have Holy Diver by Dio. Yeah. And Power Slave by Iron Maiden. And yes, even Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche. Even though my opinion on that album is relatively mixed, but mostly positive. Okay, and now we get to number one. If you've been following me since the very start, you know what my favorite metal album is, and that is Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 by Helloween, released in 1988. I mean, come on, you have to. If you've known me since the very start, you all know how much I love Helloween. You all know how much I hold them in such high regard. And they absolutely deserve it. I mean, heck, their most recent album from last year won the best album of 2021 for me. Spoiler alert, in case if you haven't seen that video, but I encourage you to do so. It is just, I mean, Keeper 2 is just flawless. Literally, both of the Keeper albums are flawless, but I love this album a little bit. I love Keeper Part 2 a little bit more because this was really the first album I listened to from Helloween. I mean, with I Want Out, which is to this day still my favorite metal song by anybody. You also have Keeper of the Seven Keys, Eagle Fly Free, March of Time, Rise and Fall, You Always Walk Along, We Got No Right, etc., etc. This album is just banger after banger after freaking frackin' banger. I mean, what else do you want me to say? This is a masterpiece. A freaking masterpiece. What more do you want me to say? Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 by Helloween. Favorite metal album, and will likely remain that way for a good while. Okay, so with that said, that concludes this edition of Magic Metal Mondays. Thank you so much for watching, my fellow YouTube divers. This is WaterDive122 signing out, ready to dive into more fun on YouTube. Thanks for watching.